Welcome everyone to the Metabolic Nutrition Support Call. And we haven't gotten together for a few weeks. Tonight, I really wanted to dive into somebody that I really admire a lot. Her name is Rhonda Patrick. And if you've never heard Rhonda Patrick, I think you'll enjoy her. She has a PhD in biomedical sciences. Her specialty is micronutrients for longevity and for health. So she's pretty much aligned with all that we are doing in this community. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get to listen to her. She may get a little bit scientific. I've skipped the beginning of the video, so if anyone is wanting the whole video, just let me know, and I'll put that in. Put that link in both the email and in our Live Younger on Purpose platform on Facebook. So she does talk when she first gets introduced. This is a metabolic summit that she's at. And when she gets introduced, he goes over all of her background and gives her all the accolades that she's received over the years. She's worked very closely, and some of you know this gentleman, Bruce Ames. He's an older scientist who's been around for a very long time. He was the one that was able to do the clinical studies on lipoic acid and N-acetylcysteine and found the longevity signals for that particular compound. So she's worked closely with him. Again, he's an older scientist. She's also worked with Walter Longo and a lot of other amazing researchers. And so at the very beginning, she's talking about LPS. And for those of you who don't know what LPS is, it's a lipopolysaccharide, and they're large molecules that consist of lipids and polysaccharides together. And they are bacterial toxins. They're often called endotoxins. And so when our microbiome gets out of good balance, we can produce more of these LPS. And when we produce LPS, that can damage the heart. It can also damage the brain, because the brain and the GI tract are directly connected. So she talks about that at the very beginning, the cardiovascular system, the brain, and I've kind of skipped that, and she's starting to talk about the summary part of things. So let me go ahead and share the screen, and we will listen to her for about 30 minutes. Take notes, because afterwards I want to be able to have conversations around what you heard, questions you might have, maybe new learnings that you've gotten just by listening to her. So hold on as I share the screen. I'm going to try to, there we go.
Conversion into kynurenine. So it actually increases the transport of tryptophan in the brain and also the conversion of tryptophan into serotonin. So sort of a summary of this part of my talk is that intestinal permeability can lead to the leakage of bacterial products like lipopolysaccharide, LPS, into circulation. And we talked about cardiovascular health and atherosclerosis, but it also affects the brain. And it can generate inflammatory responses that can change tryptophan metabolism, change the way serotonin production is made, but also it affects the blood-brain barrier, and that can also affect the way our brain is aging. So LPS in circulation is not a good thing, and maintaining a healthy gut barrier is important for both cardiovascular health and for brain health. But there's other mechanisms by which LPS can sort of wreak havoc on our health. And this has to do with the binding of something that's a receptor on almost every single cell in our body. It's called toll-like receptors. We have these everywhere. We have them on our immune cells. So toll-like receptor 4, TLR4, LPS binds to these receptors. And when it does this in immune cells, of course, there's lots of inflammatory responses that are generated, but it also leads to what's called inflammaging, the aging of our immune system, where our immune system becomes less robust at protecting us against pathogens as we age. It also becomes better at making inflammatory cytokines and doing it in a sort of shotgun approach, where it's kind of like there's a lot of collateral damage. The toll-like receptors, when they interact with LPS on muscle tissue, it's been shown to impair glucose uptake into muscle tissue, which of course would affect metabolism, cause metabolic dysfunction. On liver cells, it's been shown to play a role in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And in the brain, we talked about a few problems with the breakdown of blood-brain barrier. It's been shown to also lead to depression as well as neurodegenerative disease. So let's talk about what happens when these toll-like receptors on immune cells are activated and inflammatory biomarkers are elevated. So for example, people that are, this is a different study than one I mentioned previously. This is an even lower dose of LPS. When people are given a low dose of LPS, such that there's really no clinical symptoms, no clinical endpoints that were noticeable, the individuals had a up to 100-fold increase in their inflammatory biomarkers. So they had a 25-fold increase in TNF alpha, a very powerful pro-inflammatory cytokine, and a 100-fold increase in IL-6, which is also a pro-inflammatory cytokine. They also had an increase in markers of insulin resistance. HOMO-IR increased by 32%, and markers of insulin sensitivity decreased by 21%. So this is kind of evidence that even a low dose of LPS, remember LPS originates from the gut, can massively increase biomarkers of inflammation. And the levels of LPS we're talking about are chronically elevated in people that are overweight and obese. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But inflammation itself has been shown to play a role in aging. It's been shown to accelerate epigenetic aging clocks. So these are epigenetic signatures that have been identified by Dr. Steve Horvath, Dr. Morgan Levine, and others to basically be able to biomark biological age. There was a study that was done by Dr. Levine and colleagues where people who had head and neck cancer that were undergoing radiation and chemotherapy treatment combined, they had this treatment done, and immediately after their treatment, their epigenetic clocks accelerated by 5 years. So that's like they had aged 5 years. 6 months to a year later, most people's epigenetic aging clocks returned back to baseline, returned back to normal, except for people who still had elevated inflammatory cytokines. Those individuals with an elevated inflammatory cytokines at the 6-month mark or 1 year mark after their treatment still had massively aged epigenetic aging clocks. So chronic inflammation can accelerate epigenetic aging. It's also been associated with accelerating aging itself. In fact, suppression of inflammation has been shown to be important for aging and the quality of life as well as cognition. So this was a large cohort study out of Japan, where a variety of biomarkers were measured in individuals that were elderly, individuals that were centenarians, so they were 100 years old, individuals that were semi-supercentenarians, these are individuals that are 105 years old, or in supercentenarians who are 110 years old. And a variety of biomarkers were measured, everything from long-term fasting blood glucose levels, so HbA1c, to liver function, to lipids, to kidney function, to telomere length and immunosenescence, to biomarkers of inflammation. And the only thing that was predictive of an individual basically living to the next stage was suppression of inflammation, so low markers of inflammation. And that was also the only thing that was predictive of cognition, like being cognitively capable in older life as well. So I think probably what most people are interested in now are, okay, well, it seems as though it's really bad to have LPS in our circulation, and it originates from our gut when our gut barrier is in some way, shape, or form compromised, intestinal permeability occurs. So let's talk about some lifestyle factors that are known to affect gut permeability or intestinal permeability. Since we've been talking about the brain and we've been talking about the role of LPS originating from the gut on the brain, it's a two-way road. So the brain also affects the gut. And I think that anyone in this room who's gone to graduate school or med school or any kind of higher education and has experienced the massive stress probably has felt some kind of gut symptoms. I know I did. I mean, there was definitely there's an association between being chronically stressed and having a GI problem. And it took me a while to figure that out when I was in graduate school. I didn't know what was wrong. I thought maybe I had, IBS or something. And turned out it was actually stress. So there's been some nice studies done. In fact, people giving a presentation release LPS into their circulation. So in fact, you probably measure my LPS right now. I'm sure it'd be off the charts compared to yesterday when I was having fun with my family at Disneyland. But a lot of the mechanisms have been worked out on this. And in fact, one of the stress hormones that is released when we are stressed is corticotropin releasing hormone. And this binds to a type of immune cells that are present at the level of the gut called a mast cell. There are receptors for corticotropin releasing hormone on mast cells. And when that stress hormone binds to the mast cell releases proteases, which then degrade a bunch of proteins that make up the tight junctions that hold our intestinal gut, our membranes, our enterocytes together. And so this causes, again, this is intestinal permeability. This is what happens. And that allows food antigens to leak into circulation, allows LPS to leak into circulation. It allows other things as well, bacteria. So this is how psychological stress in the form of a talk you're giving, or financial stress, or social relationships. There's lots of different, taking care of a sick family member. There's lots of ways that a person can be stressed. Graduate school, but it's kind of, I think it's important to realize that managing our stress is really important for our gut, basically, and for helping to prevent intestinal permeability. Probably not surprising, what's called an obesogenic diet, something that can lead to obesity. This is a combination of high fat, high sugar, low fiber. So you can feed people a high fat, high sugar, low fiber diet, and after about 4 weeks, their LPS levels are increased by 71%. I would argue that you could just do this and then 1 hour later measure that, because there's something called postprandial endotoxemia, which is the release of, as I mentioned, LPS is a type of endotoxin. So it's often, you'll see in the literature, the words interchange, lipopolysaccharide, LPS, or endotoxin. So food itself, when we eat meals, there's postprandial inflammation. Part of that postprandial inflammation can be, connected to LPS that is released, not all of it, but part of it. So an obesogenic diet, something that can make people, get fat, can also increase LPS levels. Obesity itself has been associated with higher circulating levels of biomarkers of intestinal permeability, such as zonulin, and we'll talk a little bit more about zonulin in a minute. And so there's been this sort of, is it the chicken or the egg, or what is it the obesity that causes LPS to be released, from intestines and is basically causing intestinal permeability, or is it the diet that's causing the obesity that's doing it? And it turns out it's probably both. There seems to be evidence of both of these things occurring. And so then what you have again is one of those vicious cycles, because you have the diet that's causing the obesity to, that's basically wreaking havoc on your gut health and LPS basically. And then the obesity itself is also doing it. And in fact, weight loss can decrease markers of intestinal permeability. So people that were obese, that decreased their BMI by about 7, were also able to decrease markers of intestinal permeability. And there's a million reasons why we should, lose weight if we're overweight or obese. Obesity, in extreme cases, very extreme cases, can have a massive effect on lifespan. So extreme obesity, this is a meta-analysis of about 20 prospective studies, found that extreme obesity, a BMI between 40 and 45, is associated with a 7-year decrease in life expectancy. Morbid obesity, this is a BMI between 55 and 60, is associated with a 14-year decrease in life expectancy. So there's every reason to want to lose weight, and particularly, lose fat and visceral fat. And there's a lot of ways that can happen. I know a lot of great speakers at this event will discuss that. But probably one of the easiest ways that Dr. Rowe just mentioned a moment ago is caloric restriction. And there's a lot of ways that you can get to caloric restriction. You can count your calories and diet. You can skip meals. You can, exercise and skip meals. There's lots of ways to do it. But I think at the end of the day, the reality is that when you limit your food intake, you can lose weight. It's effective. Binge drinking is something that also has been identified to cause massive LPS release from the intestines. Probably a lot of people that already have underlying gut issues are more familiar with this because they've probably noticed when they drink alcohol, they might start to have gut issues. And so binge drinking, this is for women about 3 to 4 drinks, and for men like 4 to 5. So it's a lot. I mean, this is more relevant for a college audience, to be honest. But it's important to keep in mind, right? I mean, binge drinking does increase LPS. And I think most of us are probably more interested, what about moderate alcohol consumption? What effect does that have? And there's been associations with moderate alcohol consumption and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So the bacteria in our gut mostly are localized to the distal end of our large intestine, or our colon as it's called. Bacteria are not really supposed to be in the small intestine. I mean, this is where fats are absorbed. It's where simple sugars are absorbed, proteins. So the complex carbohydrates are mostly broken down in the colon. But when bacteria make their way into the intestines, it can cause problems. It can cause zonulin release. And we'll talk about why that's important for intestinal permeability in a minute. But so there is some connection between moderate alcohol consumption and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I will say this, I mean, there's not a ton of literature on this, and it's quite, likely, like we all know, observational studies, there's a million factors. I mean, maybe it's a combination of people that already have some underlying gut issue, or maybe it's a combination of people that are eating obesogenic diet and drinking alcohol, or they're stressed and they're drinking alcohol. Maybe it's a 2-hit hypothesis. We don't really know, but it's something to keep in mind. Alcohol can be hard on the gut, especially in combinations with other things that are hard on the gut, like stress, for example. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about the zonulin that I've mentioned a couple of times. Again, looking at the intestinal gut barrier, we have our enterocytes that are connected together through tight junctions. So gliadin is one of 2 proteins that is present in gluten. So gluten is found in a variety of different types of whole grain sources. Gliadin binds to a receptor on the surface of our intestinal epithelial cells called the CXCR3 receptor. And when that gliadin binds to that receptor, it causes the release of a protein from our enterocytes, our gut cells, called zonulin. And zonulin then binds to a series of other receptors present on our epithelial cell surface. When that happens, this then causes tight junctions to disassemble. And when the disassembly of our tight junctions happens, again, that's intestinal permeability. We can have things going from our gut into our circulation like LPS. A lot of this work was pioneered by Dr. Eliseo Fasano at the University of Massachusetts Hospital. It is thought that, so people with celiac disease, it's thought that gliadin is the major problem for them because of this mechanism, the release of zonulin, and therefore disassembly of the tight junctions, which actually stay disassembled for quite a long time and allow LPS to then go into circulation and do all the things that we just talked about. With people that don't have celiac, it's thought that it might be a more transient opening and closing. So just to kind of play devil's advocate here, well, you think, okay, well, if gluten has gliadin, and gliadin is going to release zonulin, and that's going to disassemble my tight junctions even for 30 seconds. I don't want that, right? So, I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking. But again, to play devil's advocate, when you look at some of the observational data and people that are eating whole grains, we see that people that are eating whole grains seem to have a lower all-cause mortality, for example, compared to people that are not eating it. Now, again, as Dr. Rowe pointed out, nutritional observational studies are just, it's like a disaster for establishing causation. And I think, I could just point out 10 things, but with studies like this, for one, whole grains include a variety of gluten and non-gluten containing proteins. The non-gluten ones wouldn't have gliadin. So these are things like quinoa, buckwheat, oats, millet, barley. The other would be, okay, well then maybe people are eating whole grains or just eating less refined grains. And in fact, that is the case. People that are eating whole grains are eating less refined grains. And so there's a million things that you can look at here, but at the end of the day, it still kind of makes you go, well, maybe I shouldn't freak out too much if I have a little bit of gluten. And the same goes when you look at for biomarkers of inflammation. People that eat whole grains have lower biomarkers of PAI1 and also of C-reactive protein compared to people that are not eating it. But again, people that are eating these whole grains, in fact, if you look at the methods of this section, it's all whole grains. It's not just gluten-containing ones. So we know that whole grains are a good source of fermentable fiber for bacteria in the colon, and fermentable fiber is then by many bacteria converted into butyrate. So butyrate is a short chain fatty acid. It is the major energy source for colonocytes. These are the enterocytes, the gut epithelial cells that I was talking about. They're producing about 70% of all the energy for those cells. And so there's also been a variety of studies that have shown, for example, if you give butyrate to an animal, it can prevent LPS leakage and it can prevent the formation of atherosclerosis in animal models that are predisposed to this, for example. So butyrate produced by bacteria in our gut is actually a good thing. There are a lot of different dietary sources of butyrate, that don't include gluten. So pectins, for example, are a type of fermentable fiber. This is found in berries, it's found in root vegetables, it's found in citrus. Beta glucans are a really good source of fermentable fiber. They're found in mushrooms, oats, and barley. Inulin is another source of fermentable fiber. It's found in garlic, onions, and artichokes. And resistant starch is another source, and it's found in green bananas and cooked and then cooled potatoes. So these are other dietary sources of fermentable fiber that are known to increase butyrate and also increase butyrate producing bacteria in the gut. But there's other lifestyle factors that can affect butyrate as well. So omega-3 fatty acid consumption is able to increase the concentration of butyrate producing bacteria in the gut. Aerobic exercise training can increase the production of butyrate producing bacteria in the gut independent of diet. And time-restricted eating is also able to increase the production of different types of butyrate-producing bacteria in the gut, because bacteria in our intestines are also on our circadian rhythm, much like every cell in our body are on a circadian rhythm. We'll hear a lot about that from Dr. Sachin Panda in a couple of days. But time-restricted eating, basically having the absence of food seeing our gut, is important for basically decreasing, non-butyrate types of producing bacteria and increasing butyrate producing types of bacteria in the gut. What about dietary fat? So if you were to take, the study's been done, if you take 300, calories in the form of a glucose beverage or orange juice or cream, heavy cream, and you look at first inflammatory biomarkers after consumption of those 300 calories from either of those beverages, or water, but there's no calories in water. Inflammatory biomarkers will be elevated in the glucose-containing beverage, and they'll be elevated in the heavy cream, but not the orange juice. Only the heavy cream increases LPS. The glucose does not, which is very interesting. There are meta-analysis that have been done looking at fat and LPS. And it seems as though fat can be hard on the gut, particularly saturated fat, without fiber. Now, does that mean fat is bad? No, I think that we've established that quite nicely over the last couple of decades. I think that if you look at the quality of evidence here, you'll see a couple of things. One, that most of the fat sources used are processed oil. They're coconut oil or palm oil. And when you look at the high fat studies, they're mostly given also with a biscuit or something that's refined carbohydrate. And there's enough evidence out there to show that saturated fat in combination with refined carbohydrates seem to really be key for increasing LPS from the gut. But I just kind of wanted to point this out, because I think as we are kind of shifting, there's a metabolic paradigm here where we're learning maybe fat and saturated fat isn't as bad as we thought, that we shouldn't just throw everything out. There are still things to consider, and there's a lot of interacting and nuanced factors here. And I think that looking at the effect of dietary fat on LPS leakage from the gut is one that we should probably explore more and explore it better. So saturated fat and then polyunsaturated fat in the form of omega-3 has been shown to lower LPS leakage from the gut. In the form of omega-6, like vegetable oil, in humans, if the vegetable oil is heated, it increases LPS leakage from the gut. But if it's not heated, it doesn't seem to have any effect in humans. In animal studies, omega-6 will increase LPS leakage from the gut, but animal chow, when the pellets are made, it's possible that the omega-6 is heated. I mean, there's just no telling. I think the bottom line is also, when you look at some of these studies, when you have saturated fat with a fiber matrix, the LPS response is blunted. So it kind of made me I like cream in my coffee, and I was kind of looking through all this literature, and the one thing that I really seemed to see consistent was like when you just have fat, like putting butter in your coffee or cream in your coffee, like it does seem to be harsh on the gut, and a variety of mechanisms have been worked out on that. Bile acids, which are increased for the absorption and digestion of dietary fats, is one thing that's been shown to basically affect gut permeability. And the fiber actually slows the absorption of the fat, much like it does with glucose as well. So I do think that I may reconsider putting so much cream in my coffee, because that might be affecting my LPS. But the other thing is emulsified fats seem to be really bad for LPS leakage. So does this mean that a ketogenic diet is bad for our gut or is leaking LPS into circulation? No, there's no evidence of that. And in fact, there's such profound changes in metabolism when you're in ketosis that it's quite, I think, a good hypothesis that if there even was LPS leakage, that maybe there would be a blunting of the inflammatory responses. Or in fact, like I mentioned in a question to Dr. Rowe, I'm very interested in the production of beta hydroxybutyrate during ketosis and how this may travel perhaps even to the intestines and affect colonocytes and energy metabolism in our gut cells that are helping maintain the gut barrier. And I would love for anyone to do some experiments on this, because I think it's a really interesting and wide open field that no one's looked into. And I honestly, if there's any graduate students looking for their dissertation hypothesis, I think it would be really interesting to look at that. So you can biomark intestinal permeability. A variety of biomarkers in the literature. I mentioned zonulin, a big one. The lactose mannitol ratio directly measures two non-metabolized sugar molecules that are able to permeate your intestinal mucosa. This is something that a primary care physician can order for anyone. I'm actually going to try to get this done now that I've really been diving into this literature. I'm going to try to do it after a couple of different types of meals that I eat. And it seems as though 1 hour after a meal is when you really get the peak of an LPS response from food. So I'm personally going to try this out. This is all just me experimenting here, so I'm not, saying that it's going to really tell me much. But this is used in the literature. Lactose to mannitol ratio is used as a biomarker for intestinal permeability. I wanted to get into omega-3 because it was quite clear that omega-3 in human studies and in animal studies seems to blunt the LPS, the postprandial endotoxemia, as it's called, or the LPS response after a meal. And there's been a variety of mechanisms that have been worked out to understand how this is. And it seems as though there's a few things happening. I mentioned already omega-3 increases butyrate-producing bacteria. Butyrate-producing bacteria help prevent intestinal permeability, like that's been shown. The other way is that omega-3 increases the production of something called intestinal alkaline phosphatase, or IAP, as it's shown on the screen. So if we're looking again at our gut barrier, quote unquote, we have our enterocytes connected by tight junctions. The intestinal alkaline phosphatase does a variety of things. One, it basically degrades and destroys LPS itself. It also changes the LPS producing bacteria in the gut. So it seems to decrease the LPS producing bacteria and then increase the butyrate producing bacteria. So this is another way that omega-3 may affect inflammation through a totally different mechanism than all the other mechanisms that we already know about. And omega-3, I just want to spend a moment talking about because it's so important. And low omega-3 intake from seafood has been identified as one of the top 6 preventable causes of death. This was a big study that was published a few years back out of Harvard. And omega-3, there's 3 different sources of it. So there's a plant source of it that you can find in walnuts or flax seeds or chia seeds. This is alpha linoleic acid, or ALA. And then there's omega-3 that is found in seafood. So there's the microalgae, but also the fish and all the sea animals and sea creatures that are eating the microalgae. It accumulates in their adipose tissue. So there's Eicosa pentaenoic acid, EPA, and there's Docosa hexaenoic acid, or DHA. And so it was the omega-3 from seafood that was identified as being responsible. So basically not getting enough omega-3 from seafood was identified as leading to 84,000 deaths a year. So 84,000 deaths a year were attributed to low omega-3 intake from seafood. That was comparable to trans fats, which was responsible for 82,000 deaths per year, literally like the same. And if you walk into any grocery store and you look on the shelves, like everything's marketed, no trans fat. This is 0 trans fat. And everyone knows that trans fats are bad. Everyone knows that trans fats are bad for our health. And so it's in the public mind, do not eat trans fats. And yet low omega-3 intake from seafood was identified to cause the same amount of deaths as trans fat. But nobody's thinking about omega-3. You don't walk into a grocery store and see all the foods. We don't have omega-3, or we do. We have it from seafood. We are seafood. This is fish. We have omega-3. It's really important. And I think I really like this because the way I like to think about food is what we should be eating. What do we need to, what is the point of eating, right? We're supposed to be getting nutrients, micronutrients. These are essential vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, amino acids. We're supposed to be getting these from our food, but we're not. And instead of focusing so much on what we shouldn't eat, we should focus on what we should be eating. And honestly, when you do that, like, you don't eat the other stuff. It's like, well, that doesn't contain what I need, so I'm not going to eat it. And I think it's just a simplified way of looking at diet. And it really helps. You can always focus on what not to eat and still be deficient in important vitamins and minerals and micronutrients. So I really think it's an important way to eat. Back to the omega-3, it's really, I think, there's overwhelming evidence now that omega-3 is really important for health. So the omega-3 index, this was identified by Dr. Bill Harris and his colleagues, Clemens von Schacke, back in 2004. This is the omega-3 fatty acid level in a red blood cell membrane. And it's a long-term marker of your omega-3 status compared to something like what 95% of people measure, which is omega-3 in plasma phospholipids. So red blood cells take about 120 days to turn over, so they have quite long of a half-life. And so if you really want to know someone's omega-3 status, you have to measure the right thing. Otherwise, you could be biomarking what they had for dinner a couple of weeks ago. And it's like, oh, I had fish a couple of weeks ago. And then all of a sudden they're marked as someone that's got high omega-3. So I think this is also a potential for a lot of confounding literature. But on top of that, again, we have to measure the right thing to like get good information, right? So a high omega-3 index has been associated with a 90% reduction in sudden cardiac death. In the United States, the omega-3 index is about 4% or lower. When I say a high omega-3 index, I mean 8% or more. So high omega-3 index has also been associated with a 5-year increase in life expectancy. So people with an omega-3 index of 8% or more have a 5-year increase in life expectancy compared to people with an omega-3 index of 4% or lower. Interestingly, in Japan, people have a 5-year increased life expectancy compared to the United States, and they also have an omega-3 index greater than 8%. And I want to sort of end my talk with something that sort of blows my mind, and I think you guys will find interesting as well. And that is that a low omega-3 index of 4% or less was comparable to smoking. So everyone knows that smoking is bad for health. If you look at the red line, the red curve here, low omega-3 index and a smoker had the lowest life expectancy. The green, the top, the highest life expectancy was a high omega-3 index, 8% or more, and a non-smoker. But if you look at the orange here, that was a smoker with a high omega-3, had the same life expectancy as a non-smoker with low omega-3. So again, omega-3 seems to be extremely important for health. So I'm going to end my talk with that. We talked a lot about intestinal permeability, the role of intestinal permeability in cardiovascular health, in
Okay. So that was a lot of information. She's a fast talker, isn't she? And you know, I think that I think the thing that you all have to understand is how complex nutrition is and how many different, I mean, you look back at all the recommendations that have been given over the years and how they've changed over and over again, because and doing a clinical study on somebody with nutrition is also very difficult because there's so many variables, right? Is the person having fiber? Is the person I mean, there's just all these variables that we don't necessarily take into consideration when doing a clinical study. So sometimes we get these clinical study results, but you know, how do we know that they're accurate? And I do like Rhonda because her studies that she does are really in depth, and she's looking at all these different avenues, right? So I would absolutely love to open the call up because there was a lot of information. You may have questions, maybe comments. So I'd love to hear from all of you, you know, about what you heard, about anything that you might, want to bring here to the conversation. Peggy, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that was a lot of information just downloaded. But my key takeaway is we all want tight junctions. But what she didn't talk about, which I thought was kind of interesting, she talked about gluten and gliadin, and I think, one of the biggest things that, we in the United States deal with is this glyphosate toxic poisoning that's not only a neurointerrupter, but it has really influenced gut permeability. And a lot of people who are gluten sensitive, it turns out in many of the studies that I've looked at, they're not really sensitive to gluten. They're really being poisoned by the glyphosate, the Roundup that's being used. And what happens in the US, which is really staggering, is that a lot of the wheat product is produced by literally killing off the wheat as it's about to be harvested, and they use Roundup to kill it off so that it's not as damaging to their equipment to harvest. Well, guess what? We're all consuming that. So I have found sources of ingredients that come from Europe. And if you've traveled in Europe and eat breads in Europe, you don't get that gut inflammation problem. And so it's just something to be sensitized about. And the other thing that really struck me is the idea of suppression of inflammation, increasing longevity and cognition. And I mean, besides obviously nutrition and diet, I mean, we have this wonderful phototherapy technology that we can use to help contribute to reducing the inflammation. So I thought it was really great. And the idea of LPS. And the other thing that struck me that I had to laugh at was her expression of the obesogenic diet. I never heard that. I love these scientific expressions. They have to like add some sort of flair to it to make it sound more, I don't know, scientific, I get, or technological. But anyway, but the key thing for me was the lack of information about the effect of glyphosate on LPS.
And she does talk about it on another talk, for sure. She didn't bring it up in this particular summit. I think she had some specific goals for that summit, but you're absolutely right, Peggy. I think it's important for us to all understand the role that, I mean, in the United States, we're allowed to use Roundup everywhere. People are spraying in their yards, they're spraying around schools. Our kids are exposed to that. We're eating the food that's sprayed. And what we know about glyphosate is that it's known to punch holes in the gut. It's known to do that. So if you're eating regular gluten, from the grocery stores, then realize that that is damaging your gut health, and that permeability she's talking about. And then that LPS, that toxin that she was referring to, is what goes and it damages and causes inflammaging, as she outlined. So a lot of her words, inflammaging, we've heard inflammaging before, obesogenic. I mean, she had a lot of those type of words. And, you know, I like what she talked about as far as, you know, importance of managing our own stress level, exercising. And I like what she said about, you know, not only the exercise, but also time released eating, that those are things that we personally can do to, you know, manage our gut permeability, you know, making sure we're getting those omega-3 fats, increasing the butyrate. I know that ghee is something that I tend to use because we know that that raises butyrate as well. Very beneficial. Those short chain fatty acids are essential to that gut health. And so, you know, doing those three things, omega-3, you know, exercise and time release eating can all benefit your gut health. Tammy, you have your hand up.
Yes, that was like a lot for me, which Anne, you know that. I loved a lot of things that, you know, she pointed out that I'm working on myself still, even though I think I'm doing good at it. I probably can do much better, but the stress part really hit me, because, you know, the stress levels that we all live with and, you know, we have for the past couple of years. So, you know, through all this COVID stuff and all this and that, but that I took in a lot, and the just the scientific talk. I got what she was saying. I really did, and thank you for that. But I got more out of the stress part of everything, because that's what I'm dealing with. I get that part of it. So thanks for that, Anne. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, and obviously I loved what she had to say at the very beginning. You know, here I am presenting, and you know, I love her reference to, you know, yesterday I'm at Disney with my grandkids, and
Yeah.
today I'm speaking publicly, and here I am, you know, probably raising my LPS levels, which are going to,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, so I think it's a simple, for me anyways, a simple way of understanding that how, for me, the whole talk was more about understanding the importance of the gut to overall health. That if you can get that piece, that is where the work always needs to be done. When people say to me, you know, if I pull out, I have a lot of books here that I've read, and every single book that I've read, every single one of them, whether it be, you know, Dr. Perlmutter about brain health, you know, whether it be about Dr. Hyman, you know, whatever it is that I've read, they all say the same thing. It's gut health. You have to keep your gut well. If your gut is damaged, your cardiovascular system will get damaged. Your brain will get damaged. You'll have, you know, inflammation throughout the body. So the goal is always to keep inflammation at bay. So what does that mean? That means, and she said it clearly at the end, we need to eat food for our health. We need to
Yeah.
eat food that's going to keep inflammation down, right? So that's a really important piece.
But a lot of people don't know that stress is a really big, I mean, our eating is too, but our stress is really right up there. I mean, and people don't know what stress does to their bodies. I mean, I talk to people every day and they're stressed to the max, and I'm like, oh geez, you know, they're stressed way more than I ever was. I can't even imagine what it's doing to their body. So that to me was good hearing. It was good hearing everything but that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a standout for you. Thank you, Tammy.
Thanks.
Anybody else? What else kind of stood out for people? Or go ahead, Jen.
This is I've gotten this several times in the last little bit, but stop drinking alcohol. I keep getting this resounding, no more booze, Jen, no more booze. And she talked about whether it was binge drinking or moderate and that kind of thing. I'm just, for what it's worth, I think that if anything, there needs to be intention and there needs to be resolve. If you have the revelation that something is not good for you and you keep putting it in your body, there needs to be some kind of resolve. And the information that you provide on these calls is really, really helpful for developing that resolve and that intention letting that information sink in, and then it's like that little light switch with the patches, like all of a sudden you go to bed and you wake up and you're like, oh, I get it now. I'm not doing that anymore. Period. I'm done. And it's a confession that you're making outside of an emotional response to something. It's just like, okay, this is easy. I'm done. I understand it. I get it. And so there's a lot of really good information. She blew through this chart about fibrous something or other. She was giving lots of yummy food information about fiber, and I think it was right before that time restricted eating, but that was really good, and I think people should go back and watch that again.
She talked about pectins, berries, veggies.
Berries and root vegetables and all of those, and I love how she summed it up. Focus on what you should be doing, because I love that the law of attraction, focus on what you should be doing, and what you shouldn't be doing will just dissolve. It'll go away. It'll go away. So you focus on what you should be doing and do it, and all the other stuff will just kind of disappear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that was really important in her talk that we really need to get, and Dr. Tom, if he was here, he would be saying this as well, is that when we're eating fat, remember to do fiber with it. That is so important. And she sort of talked about that, is the importance of having good fats with fiber. I tell people all the time, if you cook your vegetables, and after you're done cooking your vegetables, sprinkle the top of your vegetables with olive oil. Olive oil is such a good, healthy fat. And it's better to use olive oil raw and not cook it. You lose all the nutrient value cooking in olive oil. So use olive oil after you've cooked your vegetables. Sprinkle it over your vegetables. Put it in salads. I mean, in fact, I have a gentleman friend who's been in treatment in Florida for a while. And what they did with him is they were giving him an ounce of olive oil a night, every single night, to improve his brain health and his overall health. So, understand that good, healthy fats are important, but so's the fiber with it. So where are we going to get fiber? We're going to get fiber from our vegetables. We're going to get fiber from some of our fruits. We're going to get fiber from some of the whole grains that she talked about, right? The quinoa and some of those nice whole grain, buckwheat, barley, those kinds of things. So, Molly, you have your hand up.
I was just going to say that she had so much information, I couldn't write fast enough. So when the recorded call comes through, I'm going to have to stop and start. And also, so in your conversation and her conversation about omega-3 and fish, I hit for my dinner, I had salmon.
Nice.
I had olive oil on my veggies.
Very good.
So I hit all the bonus points, and I had cashews earlier in the day, and I worked out and had a sauna so I could relieve the stress.
Nice. Nice going there, Molly.
Yeah, thanks.
Yay. Mara.
Yeah, she talked really fast, so I couldn't write everything down either. But one thing that really resonated with me was the omega-3. And I do protein smoothies every morning, and chia seeds and flax seeds have a lot of omega-3 in them as well. So I just wanted to add that. I eat a lot of salmon. I'm a vegetarian, and nuts are really good as well. If they're not roasted, they're raw. But I just thought she was really profound. And maybe probably 30 years ago, I had gut issues, and I started doing omegas, a lot of vitamins, water, all of that, and it all cleared up, and it's been probably 30 years.
Yay.
With no gut issues at all. So the omega-3 really resonated very much with me.
It's really important.
So,
Absolutely important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
thank
Mara.
you.
Peggy.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. So I just really wanted to amplify Tammy's comments about stress, because I think that is one of the major contributors of this gut microbiome imbalance. And that's really one of my specialties as a personal development coach. And I've trained with Dr. Mark Hyman and a variety of people. But one of the things that I want to share is the fact that we live in such a stressful environment that most people just take it as normal, and they don't realize, they have no awareness that they're stressed. And when I work with clients, one of the things I do is teach them how to de-stress. And in fact, if you'd like, I'll put a little 3-minute audio in the text messages that you can just download and use. And with a lot of my clients, I teach them techniques that they have to practice every day. And then I follow up with them and I call them and I check it out. And this one woman in particular that I'm thinking of, she knew I was going to call this particular day. I said, okay, did you practice, the technique? And she said, well, I knew you were calling, so I had to. She said, but I really didn't feel stressed at all. I didn't feel like I needed it. She said, but after I did it, I realized, oh my gosh, I really was stressed. So that's something to really start sensitizing ourselves about. Yes, it's important to make the right food choices. And also, I just want to echo your point, Anne, about olive oil, but how important it is to really find a good source of olive oil, because there is so much fake olive oil right now, because it is being, how for so long in the grocery stores, we have products that say natural, and they're not. We have that now with olive oil. So there's like a small percentage of olive oil and the rest is like canola oil or some other disgusting substance. So make sure you know your sources of olive oil. And the other thing I want to mention is berries. So important if you're consuming berries, which is so good for your balance, to make sure they're organic, because you cannot get rid of the pesticides in berries. They just are infused in that berry. So just a couple of those things to kind of keep in mind to keep us all aware and healthier.
Berries and things like peppers and thin-skinned, vegetables and fruit, if they're sprayed, there's definitely, you're going to absorb that toxin for sure. And so thank you for that, Peggy, because you're absolutely right. Stress can actually, you can do really good stuff with your nutrition, but stress will undo anything that you've done. I mean, it really is very, very damaging for sure. Lisa, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Is putting olive oil on vegetables better than doing grass-fed butter? Can you do grass-fed butter with the same benefits? Because I have also heard that olive oil is hard to find a good brand that is actually real olive oil. So I've been doing more grass-fed butter because of that.
It's a different fat, Lisa, than olive oil. Olive oil, it falls into a different category. So you're getting a whole different fat from olive oil than you are from butter. So, olive oil is a better choice if you can incorporate that and find it. We should all be incorporating and adding olive oil to our diet. And even though butter is great and you certainly can use it, you got to get that olive oil in, because again, it's a different type of fat than your butter.
Yeah, I use the olive oil on salads, but I haven't thought of using them on vegetables before.
Yeah.
Cooked vegetables.
Or even drinking it, huh?
Yeah. Right.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Lisa. Steve, Sue, you got your hands up? You're muted. Steve, Sue, you're muted. Can you unmute? Still muted.
Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to mention one thing with regard to vegetables and fruits. A good friend of mine who's really into holistic things introduced us to plasma ozone generator, which you can get pretty cheaply, under $100. And you can just get like a big dish pan. Plastics won't bother it or anything like that. Get a big dish pan, clean one, put your vegetables in it and cycle it. And it does a really nice job of getting rid of a lot of the pesticides, toxins, things like that.
Oh, nice.
And it also extends the life.
Wonderful.
I also had a question, and that's if anybody has a definitive source of the best omega-3 to get. I need to use a really good omega-3, but it's like olive oils. You look and there's 1,000 omega-3s out there.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear that.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if Barbara or anybody else wants to speak up about this. I do tend to use Life Extension, and there's another one. Peggy, what do you tend to use?
Life Extension, and they have really good prices.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
do.
think, sorry, Stephen Cherninsky also has a really good source of omega-3s
I
Okay.
use Stevens.
on his website.
Yeah, it's an Icelandic fish oil. It's good quality. It would be on what is it? My 2024.
Yeah, my 2020 something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, who was that again? I missed the first part.
The
Of
first
who-
one is Life Extension.
Life Extension.
And go ahead,
Well, I
ladies.
can Google that.
And then I believe Stephen Cherninsky, I believe he and his wife Natalie, who's a doctor, their site, I believe, is my2024.com. Is that right, Molly? You're shaking your head. And he has a nice, very nice DHEA men's formula and women's formula, and he has a really nice omega-3 product as well.
Great, thank you so much, everybody.
Okay,
And
we
olive oil, I guess we're just looking for the best cold pressed virgin olive oil, unblended.
want organic, first pressed olive oil for sure.
And that's what I was going to say, Peggy, is I always go organic on my EVU, but you're saying even some of the organic ones are not quality?
What I'm saying is you have to be careful because they might say organic olive oil, but they might be having other additives in it. So only a small percentage is the organic olive oil. So you just have to know your vendors and suppliers. And Molly asked me actually who I use. And one of the ones I rely on is California Ranch olive oil, which you can buy in the supermarket.
Yeah.
And the other one I use is Kalamazoo Olive Oil Company. They are based in Florida, but they ship and they import from all over the world. And they actually give you a breakdown of all of the different benefits of the different olive oils. Like they have higher levels of really good quality and good impact that, some are better than others. And so they give you that whole breakdown, and it's a very reliable company. And I've actually been there. They're based in St. Petersburg, and you can actually go through and taste the different olive oils, which is really cool. So I've done that, which is why I rely on them. But a lot of our communities, wherever you are, have these olive oil companies where you can go in and really vet it for yourselves. And a lot of the farmers markets are also good sources. So, just know who you're buying it from and make sure you're really getting pure olive oil.
Tammy Ray, when we traveled to Florida, we went to a specialty store that had a really quality brand of olive oil, and they had rosemary in it. Oh my God, it was like delicious. I've never tasted one so delicious.
I have one right now with basil. There's one they do with garlic and black mushrooms or black truffles. I mean, it's to die for. But they also do they import from Greece and Italy. Actually, the Tampa group may want to do a little road trip over to St. Petersburg to the olive oil place.
Wonderful.
And I was going, when you spoke up a while ago, I was going to add something similar to what Peggy's talking about, because Helen and I are going on an adventure here in Tarpon Springs that they've just opened, supposedly a wonderful olive oil store.
Wonderful.
And that's where I like to shop and get my varieties. And I've always had to go to another little town over in Dunedin. And so it's going to be nice to have one more local. So that's my suggestion, and go in there and get a variety. I've even bought plant-based omega oils. I just check around and try a variety. I don't think sometimes it's good to stick just to one thing. I mean, it's okay, but we need variety, because I don't know about you guys. I've had my diet limited so many times. If somebody says one more thing to me, I feel like I'm going to scream if they tell me I can't have something. So I want the best of the best that I can find. So Helen and I are ready to go shopping.
Wonderful. Victoria put in the chat, just for all of you, that if you go to the ewg.org, which is the Environmental Working Group, you can find the list of the dirty dozens, the one that you stay away from, that the toxins and the sprays, glyphosate, Roundup, leak into the berry or the vegetable. And then they have the list of the ones that you want to buy, that they don't necessarily have to be organic. So you can go ahead and do that. Thank you, Victoria, for that. And it is after 8 o'clock. It's been a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with all of you. You've all brought some great information, great question. And by the way, Tammy wrote in here, the oil that she was talking about is called Zarzis, Z-A-R-Z-I-S, a high quality olive oil company. And she even put the phone number in the chat. So if any of you want to take that, I'll give it a minute. I am going to go ahead and again, thank you all. I'm going to stop the recording. Hold on.
And Peggy also put her 3 minutes to destress.com in the chat.
Perfect.
Hey, Peggy,